Hi, welcome back to educator.com. This lesson covers XML as a document. There are many different types of files for which the use of XML could be appropriate, but the construction of XML revolves around the idea of a text document, so that's what we'll be taking a look at in this lesson. XML appeared in 1998. It was put out by the World Wide Web Consortium in its first edition. Various editions after that have sought to correct errors or perhaps clarify certain bits of functionality. So there were 4 versions of XML between 1998 and 2006. And in case you've ever been told not to use version 1.0 of anything, you may eventually become aware that there was a XML 1.1, which was developed first in 2004 and then in 2006. There are publicly available documents on the Web Consortium website, w3c.org, that suggest that this is as far as they plan to go. There's not going to be an XML2, as XML1 and XML 1.1 seem to cover all the bases that they were trying to take care of in terms of creating this new markup language framework. XML 1.1 was meant to take care of some technical adjustments that caused XML not to function on certain brands of servers. And it also corrected an error in the original edition of XML 1.0, which only allowed certain international characters to be used. It changed the allowances so that no matter how the Unicode standard upon which XML text is natively based ever updated itself, you could always use whatever the current version of Unicode was. There was a mistake in the syntax of the original XML that made it so it was difficult to use updated versions of Unicode, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later. In 2008, XML 1.0 was revised again. This 5th edition can be found at this web address here. w3.org is the World Wide Web Consortium website. And then XML is the page where you can find whatever the current version of XML is. And the 5th edition of XML incorporated the language specification from the versions of XML 1.1 that preceded it. So this is the version that we're going to use, since we're not particularly concerned about server technology in this course. The reason that XML looks the way it does is because of the nature of computer input. We need to be able to tell the computer where markup begins and ends. We need to give it some means of easily distinguishing between markup and content. And we need to account for the fact that a computer sees everything linearly. In lesson number 1, we took a look at an example of a restaurant menu. And we kind of laid it out according to how you'd see a restaurant menu, with a heading at the top and menu line items listed further below that and fine print at the bottom. But here we see how a computer would see the same information. It would see all the text as arriving in one long stream. There would be no distinction necessarily between where one section of the document began and ended. As humans, we can see that happen visually. A computer cannot see that without a heck of a lot of extra programming going on. So here is how a computer would see our menu example. And if you take a look at the file called menu.xml, we can see how we took that same content and laid it out according to what an XML file would be. Okay? We've accounted for the fact that the computer is going to see things linearly by carefully marking off where sections of the document begin and end. Here's the beginning of a section, the ending of a section. Here's the beginning of a section, beginning of a subsection, the ending of that subsection. And we've used corner brackets because they're not used all that often in normal text. So it's easy for a computer program to be written in such a way that when it sees a corner bracket, or as you might call them, less than or greater than signs, it might say, hey, this isn't usually in text. This probably means something else other than the text that's supposed to appear on screen. So it's kind of why XML is designed the way it is, and we're going to take a look at that in detail. So the purpose of XML is so that you can come up with custom markup so that you don't have to stick with whatever is defined in a language like HTML and reinterpret your own document sections according to what's available in an existing language. You can come up with your own names. It's made so that in addition to being able to be processed by a computer, it can be read by a human, but it also provides guidelines for a specific software entity known as an XML processor that can be part of a larger application that can take in XML content and process it for use in the larger software. So let's take a look at XML kind of from the top down. Let's say we're creating a new XML document type. It's going to be kind of an advanced email format, and we'll call it a message. So at its highest level, a document in XML consists of a prologue, which we'll talk about in the future, and the root level element. Okay, so for example, if we're creating a document type called message, our root level element would look like this. Here's our left corner bracket, or less than sign if you prefer, followed by the name of our top level element, and a right corner bracket, and then the same thing, but with this slash put in, and that indicates an ending. This forward slash always indicates that something is ending in XML. So an element, a piece of an XML document, consists of content surrounded by tags. So it's a start tag, your content, and your end tag. And content can be text, it can be other elements, it can be a variety of other things. Okay, so let's say we're going to add a couple of elements to our message document type. So here's our start tag for our message. This is our end tag for our message. And these two tags plus everything in between consist of the elements. So here's a to element, which we would expect to see in an email type sort of thing, indicating who the message is to. And then we have another one indicating who the message is from. And we've set apart each of those pieces of text with tags to create elements out of them, separate document sections. So just to reiterate, to make sure we're clear, a start tag consists of the corner brackets surrounding an element name. The element name can really be anything. That's the idea of XML, is that you can make up your own element names for whatever you want. And as of the 5th edition of XML 1.0, they can be written in any written language that you care to use. So here's the beginnings of an element here, where we've created an element called message text. There's our start tag, and then here is the content of the message text element. Following the content, you need an end tag. You must have an end tag in XML. So an end tag for a particular element consists of the corner bracket, both left and right, surrounding the element name, but again, with this slash here. Always has to be there to indicate the ending of something. And you must end all your elements in XML. So for example, to complete our message text element, here is the end tag for that element. It is possible also to have empty elements. For example, if you know HTML, there are things like line breaks, horizontal rules, things that don't really have content but that can be indicated on the page, and those are called empty elements. And XML allows you to design empty elements. You can do them one of two ways. You can declare the element to be empty, which we'll take a look at how to do that in a future lesson, and then simply include a start tag and an end tag and just make sure not to put any content in there if the element's meant to be empty. Or you can do this alternate syntax here, which consists of a start tag with the ending slash just before you close the start tag. Again, the slash always means something's ending. So if you put that slash in the start tag and don't put anything that looks like content after that start tag, then you have yourself an empty element. So for example, let's say that I had my signature, an electronic signature file somewhere, and I wanted to indicate where in my document it went. I might want to use an empty element format to indicate this is where the signature would go in my message. Now, While you can customize your element names, and some people say you can use XML only with elements, there might be other bits of information that don't, in your mind, quite rise to the element level of information, but nevertheless are useful to have around. And these generally go in attributes. They're extra information about an element. You can only put attributes in the start tag. And the way you place them is you have the beginning of your start tag, the left corner bracket, the element name, followed by a space, followed by the attribute name, an equal sign, and the attribute value in quotes. So for example, let's say that for some reason it was important to me to indicate the relative length of my message. I might include a length attribute in my message element and give it a value called brief. Maybe I have a custom list of values for the length attribute for the message element. More significantly, let's say that I was writing a program to read this XML message document type, and I had a particular file type called SIG, where electronic signatures are stored. I could put a attribute that I call file loc for file location, and then I could indicate using a URI or some kind of file system to indicate where exactly the file that I want to use is for my signature. These are a couple of examples of how to use attributes. You can see how they come in handy for an empty element where it's not quite clear what exactly an empty element might be for. There's some dispute as to whether attributes are really necessary. There's one school of thought that says you can do everything with elements. If I want to indicate the length of the message, I just use a length element. And I wouldn't need to have that extra attribute. It's really a question of your own taste. If you think something rises to the idea of being document content, then you might want to put it in an element. If you think it just provides extra information about the content, you might want to put it in an attribute. And you can find this last example in a file called message. And you can take a look at the XML for yourself. You can open this up in a text editor. In Windows, you can use Notepad. On the Mac, you could use TextEdit, or on either platform, you could use whatever kind of text editing software you might like to use. You could also try opening the XML file in a browser and see what happens. Might not be exactly what you'd expect.